On a quiet road, under an ordinary sky, life moved as it always did, unremarkable, peaceful, and unsuspecting. But in a single, shattering instant, everything changed. A tragedy unfolded that would shake the nation to its core, sending shockwaves far beyond the crash site. The crash involving Lance Webb was, at first, just another headline. Another life lost to drunk driving. Another family shattered by a senseless act. For many, it was a story they'd seen before, a grim reminder of the dangers lurking on our roads. But this case was different. It struck a nerve, igniting conversations in living rooms, newsrooms, and courtrooms across the country. It exposed a haunting question. Why was justice so elusive when the loss was so absolute? Why did the system seem to fail those who needed it most? Lance Webb's name quickly became a rallying cry, not just for one family, but for a movement demanding change. Communities gathered, united by grief and outrage, determined to make their voices heard. The story forced America to confront a painful reality. Our laws were riddled with loopholes, leaving grieving families with little sense of justice or closure. Before this, DUI laws were a patchwork. One state's tragedy could mean prison, another's just probation. There was no consistency, no guarantee that justice would be served. The Webb crash spotlighted this disparity, showing how easily devastating harm could be met with a slap on the wrist, and how the fate of victims' families depended on geography, not fairness. What began as a single devastating event grew into a crusade for reform. People who had never met the Webb family found themselves marching, writing letters, and demanding answers. Families channeled their grief into action, refusing to let their loss be just another statistic. They demanded new laws, stricter penalties, and a system that would finally listen to their pain. They called for a system that truly recognized the gravity of their loss, one that would honor the memories of those taken too soon. This is the story of how one night, one crash, and one family's determination sparked a movement that changed the way America confronts drunk driving, forever altering the course of justice. It's a story about a tragedy that became a turning point, a moment when sorrow was transformed into hope and action, and about how justice, once elusive, was forced into the national spotlight, forever changed by the voices that refused to be silenced. The night of the crash began like any other, quiet, uneventful, and filled with the ordinary routines of a small town. People were winding down, families settling in, and the world outside seemed peaceful. But in a matter of moments, everything changed. In a single violent instant, lives were shattered. The screech of tires, the shattering of glass, and the blare of sirens broke the silence, marking the beginning of a tragedy that would haunt everyone involved. A precious life was lost, a family plunged into unimaginable grief, and a community left reeling from the shock. The pain was immediate, raw, and overwhelming. The news arrived in a blur of flashing lights, urgent voices, and the cold reality of loss. For many, it felt surreal, like a nightmare from which they could not wake. The reality was stark, a loved one gone forever, their future stolen by a reckless choice. The weight of that loss settled heavily on everyone who knew them. For Lance Webb, the decision to drive after drinking that night would define his life and devastate others. In a moment, he became the face of regret, remorse, and responsibility. The crash sent shockwaves through both families, leaving guilt, condemnation, and a void that could never be filled. Relationships were strained, and the sense of loss was inescapable. The consequences rippled outward, touching friends, neighbors, and the entire community. The tragedy became a shared burden, uniting people in sorrow and disbelief. The story spread quickly, a cautionary tale about the fragility of life and the devastating cost of a single bad decision. Conversations shifted, and the town was gripped by a sense of collective mourning. For the victims' families, the initial shock was only the beginning. The days that followed were filled with unanswered questions, sleepless nights, and a longing for justice. They soon faced a legal system they believed was unprepared to deliver justice. The process was slow, confusing, and often felt indifferent to their pain. The crash was no longer just a personal tragedy. It became a symbol of a broken system, sparking outrage and calls for change. The community's pain demanded answers. People gathered, shared stories, and searched for meaning in the midst of heartbreak. And the fight for justice was just beginning. Families and advocates rallied together, determined to make sure this tragedy would not be forgotten. The journey ahead would test their resolve and the nation's conscience. In the aftermath, the search for healing and accountability would shape the lives of everyone touched by that fateful night. Before the web crash, DUI fatality laws were a confusing maze. Justice depended on geography. One judge's felony was another's probation. A DUI death might be charged as vehicular homicide, with wildly varying sentences. Prosecutors and judges had broad discretion, often leading to outcomes that felt unjust to victims' families. Repeat offenders slipped through loopholes, sometimes avoiding jail entirely. License suspensions were common, but enforcement was weak. Preventative measures like ignition interlock devices were rare. The system was reactive, not proactive, focused on punishment after tragedy, not prevention. The Webb case would expose these failures to the nation, demanding a reckoning. Grief turned to action as the victims' families spoke out, their voices trembling with sorrow but unwavering in purpose. In the wake of unimaginable loss, they found strength in unity, coming together to demand answers and accountability. Their pain became a public cause, amplified by organizations like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, who rallied communities and brought national attention to the crisis. These groups provided a platform for families to share their stories and connect with others facing similar heartbreak. The Webb case gave a face to the statistics, galvanizing public opinion and turning abstract numbers into real people with names, dreams, and families left behind. Media coverage brought the story into homes across the country, making the fight for justice impossible to ignore. News outlets highlighted the emotional testimonies and the urgent need for change. The families became advocates, attending legislative hearings and sharing their story relentlessly. Their courage inspired others to join the movement, and their words echoed through the halls of power. Their persistence created political pressure lawmakers couldn't ignore, as petitions poured in and public demonstrations grew in size and intensity. Town halls filled with citizens demanding change, their collective voices rising in a chorus for reform and accountability. The movement grew, transforming private tragedy into a national call for reform. What began as isolated grief became a powerful force for good, uniting people from all walks of life. The family's courage put a human face on a broken system, reminding the nation that behind every statistic is a story of love, loss, and hope for change. Their voices set the stage for sweeping legal change, as lawmakers responded to the groundswell of public demand for safer roads and stricter laws. The nation was ready to listen and act. Together, they proved that even in the darkest moments, hope and determination can spark real, lasting change. Public outrage forced lawmakers to act. Mandatory minimum sentences for DUI fatalities replaced judicial leniency. Now, a conviction meant prison. No more probation for deadly drunk driving. Ignition interlock devices became standard, preventing offenders from repeating their mistakes. Restitution laws required offenders to compensate victims' families for their loss. These reforms acknowledged both the emotional and financial toll of the crime. The changes were debated, but the momentum for reform was unstoppable. The Webb family's advocacy made inaction impossible. The legal landscape was redrawn, one statute at a time. The system began to value victims' lives and hold offenders truly accountable. Tragedy had become the catalyst for real, lasting change. The new laws transformed courtrooms across the country. Judges' discretion shrank. Mandatory sentences brought consistency and gravity. A guilty verdict for a DUI fatality now meant prison. No more uncertainty for victims' families. Prosecutors had stronger leverage, and defense attorneys faced higher stakes. Hearings for ignition interlocked devices, and restitution became routine. The focus shifted to prevention and reparation, not just punishment. The legal system became more comprehensive, deterring future offenses. The message was clear. Drunk driving would be met with real consequences. The reforms brought order to a once chaotic system. The gavel now fell with certainty, honoring the value of every life lost. The web tragedy had changed the rules, forever. Not everyone agreed with the new laws. Critics argued that mandatory minimums removed judges' ability to consider unique circumstances. Some worried the focus was too much on punishment, not enough on addressing addiction. Calls grew for a balanced approach, combining strict penalties with treatment and prevention. Public awareness campaigns and education became part of the solution. The debate shifted from being tough on crime to being smart on crime. The reforms sparked an ongoing conversation about justice, prevention, and rehabilitation. The dialogue continues, a sign of a society striving for true justice. The Lance Webb crash became a catalyst for lasting change. Grief was transformed into a movement that reshaped the nation's laws. The legacy lives in mandatory sentences, ignition interlocks, and restitution for victims. These reforms have saved lives and brought consistency to justice. The story is a reminder that preventing drunk driving is everyone's responsibility. Legal change is most effective when supported by a culture that rejects impaired driving. The tragedy showed that public safety is a collective effort. Justice may not be perfect, but it can bring meaning to senseless loss. Even from darkness, a safer future can be forged. One voice, fueled by love and loss, truly can change the world.